Welcome to another episode of KLINK Africa, your holistic space that intertwines work, lifestyle, beauty, and wellness. We are your hosts, Karabo Tsailani Nondumo and Sapri Mafuyani.
Hello.
And today we are joined by my special friend who does amazing work. Her name is Sazini Mojapelo. She's CEO of the South Africa Gender-Based Violence and Femicide Response Fund. She is passionate about empowering women and youth, and she tirelessly pursues her mission to make a tangible difference in our lives. Sa, you are going to teach us a thing or two about what affects women, what issues we go through, and the important conversation of gender-based violence. We welcome you to join in the conversation, and we hope we can change this very important messaging around gender-based violence. So, Sa, welcome.
Thank you.
And tell us a bit about your background before we get into the business.
All right. So thank you for having me. I think I've wanted to have this conversation with you, both of you. Missing Kuku, obviously.
Yeah.
But I am Sazini, born in 1979.
Don't
and
look
I
it
love
though.
saying my age. By
Do not
the way.
look it. Yeah.
And to a 17-year-old girl. And I think that's where my life kind of got defined in the work that I do. Because at that point, patriarchy took its course. Because she was 17, the boy who damaged her came to pay damages for the damage they created. But lo and behold, look at God's story.
Yes. Yes.
And what a beautiful story.
That's a bit of my background, but it's also a very common story.
Yeah.
Right? Most of us are born to single parents. Some can be teenage parents like mine. But the way the socialization process and the patriarchal system we operate in then define a woman who's pregnant out of wedlock as paying damages and the man coming to fix the damage. So that in itself begins to set a train of events for that particular child and the mother that unfolds. And it's some of those things that underpin the issues that we face today in society. Yeah.
And do you feel that because you're born of a damage, you carry that into your life as you grow older? Does society ever see you as an individual? Do you ever see yourself as capable of love, or you carry this damage title with you as you grow older?
I think you'll find that for most they do, but it also depends with the broader family and the family environment. I was raised by a pastor, my granddad, who was a reverend. So he actually, because he was a man of God, said there's no accident. God does not create any accidents. You were called to be. And regardless of how you are born or with what situation you find yourself in, every person has a purpose. So I think as the socialization process starts, it starts in the home. And the bringing up of boys and girls is in the home. And however that family setup defines a person, it can carry through life.
I love how you started. You started by explaining that you're born to a 17-year-old girl, who then becomes a mother. How do you think that process and the one that follows of paying damages thrusts the issue, the burning issue that we have of gender-based violence into what unfolds in such a girl's life?
Yeah.
I think the primary reason I would raise it and let that be the departure point is because it creates from the onset the inequality, which is a structural driver of gender-based violence. So as you transcend into a woman and you get into the home, whether you become married, because there are many people who fall pregnant first and damages are paid and then lobola is paid.
Yeah.
So already from our cultural perspective, it has imbalanced the scales.
Right.
You come into this relationship on a lower footing. And the man is given a higher footing by family and society. So there is the respect for our culture and we love it, but we also say in today's world, and given some of the structural drivers of gender-based violence, let's change the narrative. It's important for us to relook at the words that we are ascribing to people, so that we kind of balance the scales from the onset and deal, therefore, with any other issues that come up between men and women in a relationship that are not about objectification of one gender.
And also, you know, this paying damages kind of absolves the boy.
Absolutely.
So that's all you have to
Absolutely.
do and move on with your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But this gender-based violence fund and femicide fund, how did it start?
So in 2018, I think some of most people will remember that there was the total shutdown in South Africa. Women blocked down N1. And there was also the sit-in at JSC. And that was they would call them the civil society collective that decided to stop the cases of gender-based violence. It had gotten to epic proportions. And after that, we had, I think the most pivotal one, which is etched in everyone's memory, is Uyunene.
Yes.
The young girl in UCT going to a post office. Everyone said, what is going on? She could not have been, there was no way that should have happened. What kind of society are we living in? And I think that just spurred the call to action from government, civil society, private sector, academia, all sectors started saying, how do we deal with gender-based violence? And from that, the Gender-Based Violence Response Fund was born, and it was initiated by private sector, predominantly the IWFSA in South Africa. They then went around asking private sector to make a contribution. But the establishment of the fund itself and the mandate of the fund was from President Cyril Ramaphosa. Okay. So for many organizations that support the fund, be it bilateral organizations or private sector organizations, it's referred to as the Presidential Fund dealing with gender-based violence. And we have accountability to the presidency himself. On a quarterly basis, we have to give updates, as we do to private sector and society as a whole.
Let's, you know, I think depending on who you speak to, there's varying views on how excessive the scourge of gender-based violence is in South Africa. So give us a perspective. What are those numbers in terms of what happens in South Africa?
And the progress.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think the president, in the launch of the fund and in the presidential summits he's held twice, there's one where I think it came out on national TV where he said, you know, we hang our heads in shame in South Africa for the role men have played in what we've done to our women. And the reason that being, in South Africa, we have 8 times higher femicide. Women dying at the hands of their partner. 8 times higher than the global average. And we are not a war-torn country. So you have to pause and ask yourself. And it was made worse during COVID. Women were stuck at home with their perpetrators. And then some men who could not work or leave the home became perpetrators.
Out of frustration.
Out of frustration and the different issues they were facing by being at home. So in the global average is 1 in 3 women will experience gender-based violence in their lifetime. A prevalence study done in the last year in South Africa showed that 47% of the women have experienced violence. So for us, it can be easily 1 in 2. And if you look at the 3 of us sitting here, it's 1 in 3, 1 in 2. So now if you look at 50% of this population is women, then that means what? 30 million, 15 million? The numbers are stark. And an emergency response is required by South Africa as a whole to deal with gender-based violence. And hence the establishment of a fund like this one. And also, for some who may not know, in the 6th administration, and it was seen as a political move when the president signed the GBV bill into law. But it was the 6th administration acknowledging that they actually had these presidential summits, that during that administration there was a total shutdown. And one of the commitments made was to put a law into place that would create a national response to dealing with gender-based violence.
And you know, we always, not always, but we tend to think that gender-based violence is only physical. And it starts way before the physical, right? It's the mental, it's the emotional, it's the lag that we come with into relationships that we give power to this man.
It's the economic often.
It's the economic often, you know, some people cannot leave that situation because then how are they going to survive? Or can you even go home? You know, do we create enabling environments for our girls to come back home if it doesn't work out? And what about the policing system and the forensic testing backlogs that we've heard about?
So, to your point, when you say there is the element of once you've experienced violence, what then do you do? And that it's not physical all the time. So the definition of gender-based violence is not physical harm. It is mental, psychological, financial, physical, sexual.
Yes.
So if you look at the pure broad spectrum of what categories of gender-based violence are there, it is the fact that it is not only when we can see the harm, the mental depression and the psychological elements are also gender-based violence. And that's normally where it would start.
Yeah.
And you feel that this is not making sense, this is not working. And your person would, as an individual, start rejecting it and dealing with it. And then the other person enforces physical subjugation to get the point across. So it can graduate to physical. And once it's graduated to physical, from a cultural perspective, but also the institution of marriage, if it is in a partnership like that, we are told to go and talk to your aunt. You're not told to first port of call is go to the police. You stay in the family structure.
Yes, sit on it. Yeah.
And then you go to an aunt, his aunt, your aunt, and then there's a family intervention. And then you stay. And it escalates. And we find that the cases of gender-based violence then take 3-4 years, and some lead to femicide, where they subsequently kill, and it was an accident. And in quite recently, we've had quite a number of those. There was the pastry chef, where we all thought, what? And the guy ran away and came back and said, we were fighting, and
And the
parents
daughter
knew.
witnessed this.
Yes. But it was in the family structure. So that's where I think at that point, there needs to be recognition and awareness within the family structures that as a person, yes, you can inform the family, but it escalates if not dealt with, which then takes it out into the criminal justice system, where you then report it to the police. But the challenge we have there, yes, can also be around the law, because it's then seen as domestic violence. And the precepts of that law articulate certain processes. But also when you get to a police station to report, we know a majority of the policemen are men. And yes, there's been some reform in the police sector to have a GBV desk or a GBV room where you're ushered into the room to report, and it's a confidential conversation. And yes, there are some interventions where policemen are being trained to not deter the report, but to actually take it as is and open the docket and start the process. And I think at that point, that's where stuff gets lost, because and you can report the crime of the same person many times. So if you have an issue today, you go and report it, that's docket 1. He repeats as a repeat offender and does it again in 6 months, that's docket 2. That's docket 3 on the same person. People don't know that. They think, but I've already reported it.
Right. So that's,
but actually you can report every incident.
I mean, I love how you're breaking this down, and I can't help but think that the incidence is actually even higher in South Africa.
Yes.
Because if you think about what would urge me to go to a police station to open a criminal case, it's some form of physical harm. If we take all of the other forms of gender-based violence into account, then it means that the rate is probably higher.
Yes.
Because people who've been spoken to in a way that they, it isn't right, or who are being subjected to economic and all other forms of abuse, there's no mechanism for kind of keeping a record of that, except, as you say, perhaps speaking to the parents. So it looks like the issue is actually even bigger than the jarring numbers you've shared.
And it's also the education and awareness where you actually can report that I'm experiencing violence, and it's financial violence because the kids can no longer go to school, we don't have food in the home, he's earning and we are married, and he, or whatever civil relationship you're in, and he is doing the following, and a case can be opened against him. But we don't go there. We only go there when we now think that I'm physically harmed.
Yes.
But the economic harm is not something that's reported, or people understand it to be, you either make a decision to move or find a job. But we also know that the economics and the financial is the key structural driver of why women stay.
Yes. Absolutely.
Women stay in abusive relationships because they look at the income variable and the requirements of the home and they suck it up.
But what about this need to stay married or to be seen to be married? Because that's also a societal thing, that you have stature in society when you're Mrs. So-and-so. And in most instances, when you do divorce or when you do leave, you're ostracized, you know, and some people cannot deal with that.
Yeah, I don't think it's even a case of whether people can deal with it, or it's the socialization process and the family structures where you are treated differently. If you arrive at a funeral and you're Mrs. So-and-so.
Yes. You get the first, you get the fried
You are now the,
you
are now the Makoti, you are now Malugazana.
Yes, you're elevated. Absolutely.
Your family structures has just changed. And you experience that, let's say you get married at 26 and there's an aunt so-and-so who's not married, but you arrive, it's changed. And so you now have to deal with the fact that that is going to change for me now. And the status of being Mrs. So-and-so is considered higher than not being a Mrs. So-and-so.
My well-being.
And worse still, or you left, so now you are separated. So what are you going to do? You are now a single mom. Sure, you should go back. Because it's a status thing.
Yes.
And so people, which is also socialization, right? Then people think, I'm now less. I need to probably just suck it up and stay. Because it's not only the impact of your physical well-being, your mental wellness, you're now worried about the family pressure and the social system that will cast you out because of this small thing you're going through.
Wow, Gugu. Let's touch on a controversial subject. Let's touch on the inverse of what we're speaking about. So when gender-based violence is a woman against a man, what's the prevalence of that? You know, are there issues of shame that come through with that? Do you think we're mature enough as a society where men feel empowered to seek help?
Yes, and be vulnerable.
So one of the things the strategy of the fund is to implement the National Strategic Plan Against Gender-Based Violence. So we are a private-public partnership. We don't have any other strategy but that one. And the strategy looks at 6 pillars. It has got from prevention to response to justice to economic power, and it's got research and care, research and innovation. So we did a study at Everton, and we had a sample group. We commissioned a study to be done by VIDS, and the findings were, by the time a woman went to report and they withdrew, we wanted to particularly understand why they withdraw cases. And they withdrew the case. And the men, when they were, because let me explain the process first. You go to the police station, you open a case, a docket is open. It's handed over to an investigation officer who's then supposed to investigate the allegations that have been done. So you're innocent until proven guilty. And so as the victim, you have opened this case, and then they have to get all the information from how it transpired, when, what time, how conditions, etc. So at that point, the conversation then comes up of how did this happen? The man is abused. It was a fight. He got home late, she took a pen, she hit him, then he pushed her, and then she hit back, and then he pushed her, and then she went to report. And he's, why not going to report? Because the person who hit him with a pen, it's because how does he get to a police station and say, I just got beat by my wife?
They will laugh at him.
He will get that response like,
Yeah.
The policing system again has to be strengthened and educated that it actually does happen and it does not become a shameful thing, that actually their violence is perpetrated by the woman.
Right.
And so when that investigation docket is underway, obviously as the events of what transpired come to light, it's like, okay, fine, no, we were fighting. She withdraws the case in some instances, not all. But it then goes back to the fact that it's the societal pressure and that conversation, and men then don't report because they think, how do I even have the conversation?
And they think the system favors the woman. Right?
Yes. And in most cases, firstly, like to the point of socialization, where there's the gender inequality to begin with. So it's weak for me to go and report this.
Yeah.
So he won't. But secondly, because of the incidence numbers, that it's more women who are abused than it is men. And physically so, we are smaller in stature and we don't have the same physical attributes. So the harm is seen more with the weaker person or the smaller person than you would see with the bigger person. But you would then have that situation where it's likely that he did it than she did it. So there is that imbalance, not only from a socialization perspective for the masculinity of this man who's reporting to other men that this has happened in my home, but also the thought of course they're going to believe her, that because of the stats that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think, this is where we manipulate the system as women, because we know we've got the sympathy and we are not solving the societal issue, because like you say, it's a gender-based violence, not necessarily women-based violence. And that also manifests itself in anger. This guy would probably take it out on the next girl. Maybe not you, but he will go out to the next one feeling more powerful and more determined that it won't happen this time, or he needs to correct what society thinks of him. But then how do we raise our boys? I mean, you and I have boy children. How do we make sure that we don't perpetuate this issue?
And that's a very important conversation, because what we're finding is that those who have seen and experienced violence growing up are highly likely to also perpetuate violence. But those who have not will not. So there's two sets of men. Yes, there's men who will be perpetrators of violence in its various forms. But there's men who are the solution and not the problem. And those men are allies in calling out other men. But also, if we're looking at the boy child has not formed fully his perception and views. However, in how they are growing up and their understanding of masculinity, when the testosterone hits in, yes, it gives them a swell of energy and all the hormones that happen. But those can then be actually redirected to understand that it's okay to cry. It's okay for you to be angry and not be violent about it. So it's important to then look at the boy child and have a conversation around how the boy child is the solution. So you arrest it becoming a generational issue. We did not do that as South Africa because, and the reason I say that is during apartheid, it was a violent state. And there were boys then. The same boys, 40 now. Right? 30 years democracy. Oh, he's 20 something. But he did see the violence. And they say, oh no, but you were born free. Like, what has that to do with the violence that I experienced and see?
And the trauma that I carry.
And the trauma that I see around me. So the only way I know how to deal with something is to rebel and to be violent, because that's what we did against a system that was oppressing us. But for the generation that has come, I don't know whether it's Gen Z, the ones who are 15 and below or 10 and below, they should not be seeing the same. Otherwise, it becomes a cycle of violence. Because then the ones who are in their 30s saw their parents going through the violence. The ones who are 35, 36 and above saw all of that happening. So their default settings is to push to be violent. But our boy children who are 10, 12, 13, 14 can be socialized differently. And remember, I go back to the socialization process. So when there is, a young boy gets a young girl pregnant, we are not calling it one over the other. We're talking to both about dealing with this issue. And he then understands from the onset that we have to, not you. We have done the following. So it becomes quite important to look at the boy child as a young man who is part of the solution, but also recognize that there are many more men who are actually allies with women who are experiencing abuse and will stop it where they see it. And will call out other men to say you cannot do that and shame a man who is abusing his woman. And we are not paying enough attention to men who are allies in the fight against gender-based violence. We're only focusing on the problem, but if we're to prevent gender-based violence, the men have to be part of the conversation. And if we're to deal with the gender equality we talk about, it can only be both men and women that create the equality.
Absolutely. You know, Sazini, if we were to give you a magic pen, you are president for a day, and in 24 hours, you can make some lasting structural reforms. What would those be that you think would prop up and change the outlook for gender-based violence in our society?
I actually have one. I would make the sexual offenders list public.
Yay.
And privatize it. So
I think that's a KLINK
to
moment.
hire
I'm
anyone.
sorry
Absolutely.
That is
out of
it's
all
out-
this.
that
it's
is-
the,
Yeah.
it's the KLINK moment.
Yeah.
Yes, amen to that.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
We need one
can't
after
think
this
you're not
very
joking.
heavy. No, you can't.
Like, just give me a day.
Yeah.
I'll fix that one. We hire teachers who are rapists. The Uyinene issue, that man was on the sexual offenders list.
Jeez.
It's held in a department where it takes forever to release the results. So we keep hiring people without actually knowing if they're on that list. I would make it public. I'd privatize it so it's efficient. The same way you do criminal checks,
Yes.
that should be included.
Yeah.
So we know upfront.
Yeah.
And I would empower men to also go and report and make sure that actually me and you know that he's a sexual offender. I think somewhat, somehow, that would start seeing less and less gender-based violence, because we will all know.
It's that groundswell of change that we need, right? Because a society doesn't shift if there isn't that. So, and I think definitely if you start to shame people, and unfortunately for some people that's what it takes.
Yeah, but also, I think there are two different scenarios. So in the city where we talk about these things and we have actions around them, in the villages and in the rural areas, the social structure still doesn't see it as violence. There's you own this woman. If you marry her, she's your property. You do as you wish with her. Nobody gets into your business. What's a few slaps? I mean, papa, really, just to put you in line. It's not necessarily to, it's not abuse. So the definition of abuse is also not well understood. So maybe day 2, we'll give you 2 days of episodes. You deal with that on day 2.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the work that we do. We fund quite a lot of organizations in the rural areas where our real focus is around creating awareness and education. Because we find that women in the rural areas, actually a young girl is looking forward to getting married.
Yes.
Whether she's first wife, second wife, or third wife, it doesn't quite matter. And from that position, it's because she's given the status and recognition that she's now Mrs. So-and-so, Mom so-and-so. Over age. Age ceases to be whether you're the older person, etc. As long as I am now married and I can be 18, I can be 19, my status and position in this area has just shifted.
Absolutely.
And then it shifts further when I have kids, because now I'm real in this village.
And they start calling you by your sons first.
And you start becoming
Mamaka.
Namoti
Yeah.
and you lose your name.
Yeah.
And then in the home you actually are experiencing violence. How do you break out of that? And it is more so the case that yes, you tend the land, you work in the home and etc. And he brings in the money. So there's the power dynamics as well. There's the financial dynamics as well. But you carry a status regardless. So how do you live? And also, because it's a rural area, the next police station is where?
Yeah.
And how are you
2
going to get
taxis
there?
away or a bus away. Yeah.
How are you going to juggle leaving the kids alone to go and report this man, and then you need the taxi money, and then the entire ecosystem is not enabling for her to take it up and defend herself. So in instances, the only thing she can actually do is what? Go to aunt, who's going to help her get
Or
better.
his mom.
Yes,
And
the
no one touches her boy, by the way.
Wait,
But when you get there, it's
maybe
more
if you are a
fixed.
better wife.
Yes.
But it's you are going through a process of and we found this is some of the instances, and there's a bigger one that I really want to deal with. Maybe it's 2 days. Is where yes, when you say go to the aunt, it's not your aunt.
Yes.
Remember, it's his.
Yes.
No.
Because we carry the surname now. So soon you've gone, and they tell you leave. You are now their child. So the aunt you're going to is not your aunt. It's his aunt and his mom.
Yes.
And they'll say, Swan, let us see what you can do. Let's just he'll wear the kids. Let the kids come over. Let's give him time. Then you will go back. There's never a conversation that enough is enough. You should leave. No. It's let us give you time. Let us try and fix this. Then you
Yes. Yes.
and you go back. And then it continues. And it continues. But you will seek guidance in the family first. So when I was saying that I want 2 days, is the child marriages one. Ugutwala. The only reason we get...
Sazini, sorry to disturb you. Just explain what Ugutwala is before you get into the solution.
So, Ugutwala is a process where, and it's a traditional process, where in some cultures, especially the Nguni ones, we talk about the Zulu culture. So in South Africa, it would be around the KZN, Mpumalanga area, some parts of Eastern Cape, where a young girl is, if a boy likes a girl, he would then take her to his house, rape her,
Abduct her, essentially.
Yeah.
And against her will. And because he's deflowered her or defiled her, she's now his wife. And he now then goes home to the girl's family, tells his parents, and they then go and say, this is what has happened. And now she's moved. She's now part of his home. So it comes on Ugutwala because then they would be by the river and they would grab her and carry her, which is abducting.
That is just... I'm
So
sorry.
how does that translate in present day? We are seeing 12-year-old girls, Ugutwala. But it's a 40-year-old man. Ugutwala happened between 18-year-old and 18-year-old, 19 and 20. It was young people who would then practice that. Instead of Ugushela non-stop. Ugushela means asking
Courting
a girl out,
you, yeah.
courting you. They would try, and then they would try. But now, we're finding that in the rural areas, yes, our traditional leaders still observe it and manage it. The issue is it's no longer lawful to do that.
And the girls are younger and younger.
And the girls are 12, 13.
So it's pedophilia.
It's
in real
statutory
terms.
rape.
It's statutory
It's rape.
Yeah.
The law says it is statutory rape.
Yeah.
And more so because it is a truck driver who saw the girl walking to
Who's
school.
bringing you AIDS or something?
And so when
also.
we started trying to investigate to understand why are we seeing the minister report all these teenage pregnancies? Why are we calling them teenage pregnancies? They're not teenage pregnancies. Teenage pregnancies, a 17-year-old who impregnated a 16-year-old. And also there's an age group where it's permissible. They say it should be a 2-year difference where it can be classified as that. It's not permissible, but they can be classified as such. But below a certain age, it cannot be ubutwala. It cannot be permissible. And the matter comes out because if you see it, you report it. So in the schooling system, they are forced to report it, that their child has dropped out of school because they're pregnant. And this child is 12. And the hospital is forced to report it, to write down births, right? Who is the mother? The mother was born in 2010.
Oh, Nkosiam.
The mother was born in 2012 and then 2012. Why is there a 12-year-old child giving birth? And the father, who is the father? The father is Gerald and he's
Was born in 1975.
So it's statutory rape, so they have to report it. And when they then report it, as in report it not to the police, but report it higher, say these are the births that have come out from our hospital. And for us, we're asking the question, okay, what's happened to Gerald? It was reported. The parents were in a state and they reported it, and the parents will say, we reported it. To who? When we go to the police station, they say there are no cases of gender-based violence or rape here. Who do they report to? They went to the chief, who then made the men pay a goat or a chicken, and it ended.
Because the social structures in those rural areas are still
They persist.
largely men.
And they don't see it as a problem.
Absolutely.
It's just
How
not a
can
problem.
they, when it serves them, largely?
Oh, goodness.
But also because, so you will then realize that in the family structure, yes, they saw it as a problem. Yes, they saw it as rape. And they went to their next port of authority, which is the chief in the village. And the chief, in his wisdom, dealt with it in his traditional way and said, who is the perpetrator? We should bring him here and he should pay for what he's done to this child. Do you want to marry the child? No. So it's an abuse of the system. And the chief, should he therefore be looking at it as ubutwala when he actually is not going to marry the little girl? It then ceases to be ubutwala. So why is he paying a goat when there's no intention to marry the child? And then why have you classified it as ubutwala? Because this is not, she's underage. She's most likely going to die giving birth. Or she's going to suffer through it and raise that child, but she's a 12-year-old child. The parents are aggrieved and they're seeking justice, and the only port of call is the chief, and they live with a goat and their child at home.
Sazini.
So I paint the picture, but in other parts of the continent, I would like to give it a different twist, because the one thing which I always have to say, especially if I speak to a global audience or I speak on at a continental level, is the fact that we can speak like this as South Africa because women are empowered to stand for their rights. In many parts of the continent, it is not spoken of. You cannot say this. And you cannot, even as a grown woman, you cannot speak and say anything. So we may say, oh, South Africa, and the statistics we see. The flip side, which is unfortunate, but good, is that women call you out. Women are reporting, women are going to complain, women are going to stand up, women are going to protest. We don't see the same. The only country where we've seen a recent uprising around this issue is Kenya. And the Kenyan women also took to the streets. But let's start thinking about which other parts of the continent
So very
or the world.
misleading. The absence of statistics doesn't mean the absence of the crime, right?
Yeah. But it's also sponsorship, you know, governments that make it possible for you to speak up, you know, that have female leaders in parliament that can carry the voice for you. Probably plays a role.
And for South Africa, I think, to your point, when you're saying, what about the boy child? What about the men? The leader of the fight against gender-based violence in South Africa is President Cyril Ramaphosa. It's the head of state, it's a man.
And the fund reports to his office.
And the fund reports into his office as well as we report to donors. We are an independent structure, so we are registered as a non-profit company, but we are recognized as a public-private partnership, and we have a framework that we have signed with the president that we report against. And he's a man who is leading it and urges other men to do the same. So the champion for the fight against gender-based violence is the head of state. How many else do we see on the continent?
Sazini, give us a silver lining. What are you most hopeful about?
I am most hopeful. I'll give it 2 levels. The first is I am hopeful for the generation Z or Z, I don't know.
Don't ask me.
But the younger ones, the 10 to 15 or younger than that, who do not see a difference between themselves as men, as boys and girls. That in itself is the bedrock of dealing with gender-based violence. So if I take it into a global framework, we've got the Sustainable Development Goals, and we'll take stock in 2030 of how far we've come with that. But the SDG 5 looks at gender equality. And I'm going to get technical, the indicator 2 of gender equality is a violence free from, is women who have no violence. There's no violence against women at all. You cannot achieve gender equality where women are experiencing violence or any gender is experiencing violence. So if you look at that and you look at this group of young people, they are more socially aware and do not look at a girl as inferior. And we need to safeguard that and reinforce that, because it means that in the next 20 years, if I'm to take the 30-year apartheid transition, they will not look at, and I have 2 boys and a girl, Musa will not look at Destiny as less. They are both, and they can both achieve, and they can both deliver.
And they play to their own strength.
And they play to their strength, and there's nothing wrong with playing to your strength. So if he's a creative, he's a creative. And it doesn't mean he's any less. Because he prefers the arts, and it's not shunned upon. And in the home, we are not saying to him, why are you liking those things? Leave that. That's for girls, that's for boys. We are not socializing our children that way.
That is the trick for us to help them with that, because we carry our own socialization and what we've been brought up to think. So if I think it also has to start a level below or above with us, with our education, to say it doesn't have to be, you don't have to perpetrate what you grew up with, because there's nothing healthy about that.
Absolutely. And with I was in a talk recently where they were talking about the woke generation. They will call you out. They will call you out. We didn't have that power. We didn't have that ability. When I speak, my kids are like, "Ooh, don't say that word. Don't do that." And already there's so much power in the words that we use. When I started this conversation, I said damages. They would react to that and say, "How dare anyone says that about anyone?" It cannot be allowed. Because there's power in words, and it becomes your identity and it's defining. But in this generation, yes, is woke, and yes, they're going a bit too far though, but it is with everything, how everything is no longer politically okay to say. But they also, for me, when I look at it and I engage in these conversations quite frequently, obviously, is how they're cut from a different cloth, because they are redefining and recoining things that we think is normal to say, But they'll say, don't call her that, don't say that. Why would you see it any different? And what's wrong with me wearing this? And why would you be worried that I'm wearing a pink shirt?
Yes.
They're like, I want to wear a pink shirt. And not because it's Valentine's or anything,
pink.
but I like it. It's just pink.
Yeah.
As I like that green color, I want that green color. And we buy, with my daughter, she'll go and buy these big jeans and say, oh, I like that top. And she walks across to the boys section and she asks why shops are structured like that. Why is there a girl's side and a boy's side? And I'm thinking, wow, look at this generation. They're actually saying, but why do shops have this side for boys and this? But that green shirt is nice, and they're saying it's for boys. No, it's not. I like the green shirt. And I should buy the green shirt if I like it.
And it's up to you, the mom, to be okay with her wearing that green shirt.
And at that point, being from the generation I'm at, but maybe also because I'm in the space that I'm in, I catch myself to say, okay, but another mother who's not gender sensitive,
who's not woke,
or challenged every day from an institutional, professional level, I am mindful to say, okay, she just pointed out the color, she did not point out the gender. She's irritated that it's sitting on the boy's side, and why is there that separation when she also likes it? And you see that schools, and it's still unfortunate because it is the private and the private sector schools, and it creates the inequality. But the socialization in some of the schools is where you can be anything and achieve anything. It's not gender dependent.
It's a journey.
Wow.
It's a journey, and I think this is not the last conversation we'll have. Next time we meet, we need to see the stats going down. You know, we're going to talk about how society has changed. You know, do we have that list of sexual offenders?
It should be public. It's there.
I think that the challenge would be on whether we're making progress. And in the new year, when we have the conversation again, we're going to look at improvements that we've made in this space. And hopefully the continent also would have made some inroads into addressing this, right? It's not a South African issue, it's a human issue.
Exactly.
And we are all, you know, socialized in ways that are not necessarily healthy. And I think we should start acknowledging that.
Absolutely.
And thanks so much for being with us, sir.
Sazini.
And cheers to you for this
Absolutely,
very,
for
very
the
important
incredible
work. We
Thank you
salute
for
you, we
doing.
celebrate you.
Absolutely.
We are proud of you.
Hey?
Yes.
Yeah.
What does
Absolutely.
Maya Angelou say? I come as one, but
I don't know. I leave as
10,000.
many.
I represent 10,000.
Yes,
Something like that.
yes, absolutely. Thanks for watching. Follow us on KLINK Africa on all platforms. Please like, share. We'd like to hear your comments and subscribe. KLINK. KLINK.